Hey, welcome back. In this video, I'd like to take a deeper dive on the goodness portion of the reality goodness at work framework. So again, the basis of the goodness portion of this framework is more about asking, what should I do? There is existence, I am here, what's next, now what? Certainly the world is full of stories, myths, laws, parables, and opinions about what someone should do. I've made the claim that objectively, the only thing I believe that we can say truthfully about goodness is what works. And then the rest is sort of left up to whoever the considerer is, or the group of people considering whether or not there's a single selfish considerer or a group, a civilization, for example, may have particular values like safety that they want to uphold, and so they might produce something like laws, etc. In any case, it seems like the basis for those investigations firstly cannot be denied, right? Some people will say, there's no such thing as good or evil, there's no such thing as what we should do. And I believe that that's a sort of silly statement, because at the very least we have sensation and discomfort. We at least have discomfort, right? We at least have preferences, and at the very least we can use those as a framework. We do use those as a framework, right? If you're hungry or thirsty, you will reach for food or water, drink, whatever it is. So you have a basis. We cannot deny that we have preferences, values, discomfort, drive, motivation. And then you might claim that these are very simple drives and motives, and not really worthy of honoring, and that's fine. We have our entire lives to potentially refine this process, right? Is it as important to find sustenance as it is to find friendship? We have, again, stories and models like Maslow's hierarchy of needs to reference if we want other folks' ideas, or we can simply continue to experience and notice what is true for us. Again, continuing to notice reality can begin to inform our understanding of ought, of should, of what next, of goodness. You know, if I was forced to try to make some claims, maybe about some even universal values, things that might apply to all beings, I think firstly I would say being, right? For nearly any entity, maybe all entities, I think that there is firstly an inherent value of being, of perpetuating being. And again, this very quickly becomes interesting in reality, because most of us, as far as we know, most, if not all, perceivers of these kinds of concepts, anyone capable of thinking about goodness or having a belief about goodness is mortal and dies. So I'm making a claim that being and perpetuating being is a sort of universal value, and yet none of us at this point in time can achieve that. And so then we're led to all sorts of things, right? You could go into mourning, if you will, or you could go into intellectual attempts to abstract, or again, number one, I think, is reality. And so you can just notice what comes up for us, what are our discomforts, what draws us, what repels us, so on and so forth. In this case of the considering of death and mortality, it gets a little more complicated, because I would personally say that it's very important to recognize and consider mortality. And again, this all fits into the framework. It says reality first, not goodness first, right? So just because leaning into or thinking about mortality might be uncomfortable, which I'm saying is a potential primary metric for measuring goodness, reality seems to be that you will die, and I say reality is more important. So lean into it, consider it, feel about it. Always reality first, and then we have a basis for goodness. And so as we continue our journey, we tend to grow in understandings of our values. We grow in sophistication and complexity. We begin to understand that we have all sorts of preferences and that we cannot have all things. And so, of course, we need to have some sort of hierarchy of values. That can be entirely incidental, accidental, or you can put some serious time and effort into this. And I want to point out two things. One is, and again, I consider this number one, is recognizing the reality of your priorities, right? And that's a way of understanding your priorities. And two, which is probably always different, would come from the next level down, which is goodness, which is what do you think your priorities should be, right? And this will be a different set of priorities, and it's sort of the differential between your current, the set of things that seem to be your priorities based off of your observation of your actions and feelings. And you can measure that against the theoretical framework of your priorities, or what you think would be a better set of priorities for yourself, right? And closing that gap. So that's sort of goodness in relationship with reality, and you trying to, via work, push your goodness theories towards reality and manifest them as a part of reality. And again, when you're first theorizing about your good priority of values, your good framework, it is somewhat imaginary, right? It's not necessarily manifested yet. And again, these plans and things that are not necessarily manifested yet or inherently true do have value and can potentially be forwarded into and anchored into a future state of reality. And so all this fits within the framework, and none of this discredits effort and planning and imagination, and it certainly credits exploring reality and self and recognizing your experience of comforts and discomforts, having a life, noticing when short-term pursuits result in downsides that were maybe unforeseen at first, and then upgrading your understanding of what you should be doing, right? It will not always just be pursue first-order pleasure. It will become more sophisticated, and it'll be less about sugar, and it'll become more about vegetables. It'll become less about get off. It'll become more about quality of relationship. It'll become less about spending. It'll become more about saving and gifting, so on and so forth. And then one final note on the goodness of sort of dogmatic doctrines, myths and stories, and religion. I think it should fascinate us that some ethical codes and things that seem not totally true have survived within the concept space of our species as stories passed on for generations, for millennia. That should intrigue us. It may mean that they have some value, that they beget unto the holder, the passer, the communities that carry these dogmas and these stories. It may give them some amount of survivability, and again, I think a sort of universal goodness is being and perpetuating being. So there's a lot of interesting things here. We can be open to and curious about all sorts of things. We don't need to throw away a story or a religious story or a moral claim just because it seems non-real at face value. It may ultimately beget value, something that we think is good in reality, if it's understood or adopted or carried or used in some useful or effective way. So it's an interesting game. Life is a great game, even when we're attempting to follow a framework that's fundamentally or on the surface maybe, as simple as reality, goodness, and work. So I'll close my thoughts on goodness here. I could talk about goodness quite a bit, and I'm sure I will in the future. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you all again soon. Bye.